Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a consultation specialist with S&C Lavalin. Today, we are resuming our series of live stream topics as our project moves through consultation round 2 of the environmental assessment phase. The topics we will be covering parallel our project activity will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way, especially that. And just a reminder to everyone that, as you can see on the screen, you can contact us at 1-844-424-0500, text or call us toll free. That's 1-844-424-0500. Let's get started, shall we? Today, we're going to provide a bit of an overview of the upcoming topics on the alternatives assessment process to help community members get a better understanding of the thinking behind and the activities associated with this process. So I'm going to just walk you through and introduce these topics, and we'll be covering these over the next probably 10 weeks or so, roughly. And we hope it gives you a better idea of, of what's going on with the project. And I hope it encourages you to provide some input or comments or questions about the project, because we welcome that. We're looking to be as transparent as possible to provide you with as much information as possible about the project, and we're always trying to get feedback from you. So let's review the topics we're going to cover today. Next slide, please. So we're going to do a little bit of a background on the project, just to brief people that may not be familiar with the project, who haven't been following it closely recently. So we'll go through that, and then we're going to talk generally about the alternatives assessment process to give people an idea of just how it works and the thinking that's involved in evaluating alternatives. And then we're going to run through each of the upcoming radio show and live stream topics, just so you can get as a bit of a preview for what's coming up. Some of this does get a bit complicated, so we're going to try and be here to explain it to you and help you out, so that you can follow along and provide questions where you're confused or where you feel you need some answers from the project team. So we're going to talk about alternatives routing in the preferred corridor, evaluation of alternative road corridors, proposed criteria and indicators for the evaluation of road corridor alternatives. We're going to talk about the analysis of alternatives and something called the multiple accounts analysis, and explain kind of what this is. And then we're going to talk about the evaluation of alternatives for what you call supportive infrastructure, that being things other than the road that are required to build the road and maintain the road afterwards. So facilities, so camps and laydown areas and aggregate rock sources, access roads, etc. And then finally, our last topic is going to be proposed criteria and indicators for the evaluation of alternatives for supporting infrastructure. And then at the end, we're going to talk about how you can contact us. Our door is always open. You can contact us in many ways, including the website supplyroad.ca. So let's dive in. And next slide, please. Let's now that I'm doing a live stream and not a radio show, I can actually use visuals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project location. So the Webequie Supply Road project is planned to run from the airport in Webequie First Nation southeast, and then turn east, almost due east, and run over to the McFalds Lake area, sitting in the Ring of Fire. Now, Webequie First Nation, just for everyone's information, if they're not already familiar with it, is about 600 kilometers slightly northeast of Thunder Bay. And the community itself is about 250 kilometers from both, 200 to 250 kilometers from both James Bay and Hudson Bay. So that's sort of where the project sits. And next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about the purpose of the Webequie Supply Road. So um, I need to remind everyone that Webequie First Nation is actually the proponent of this project. They are the project sponsor. So they are leading this. This is their project. I'm a member of the project team, and we work for Webequie First Nation. And so let's get back to the slide here. Um, the purpose of the supply road is to move materials, is planned to move materials, supplies, and people from the airport in Webequie to the McFalls Lake area. It's also to provide employment and economic development opportunities in the community. But in doing that, also allow the community members to preserve their language, preserve and enhance their language and culture. Um, that's really, really important. And you know, while the project is required to go through both federal and provincial impact and environmental assessment processes, Webequie has their own process, an internal process where they will decide for themselves whether to proceed with the road. So if we can go back to that, the previous slide, and then finally, um, another purpose for the road is to provide experience and training opportunities for youth, and and to encourage, and in doing so, encouraging them to pick up additional skills, receive training, pick up additional skills through additional post-secondary education. Next slide, please. So let's provide a bit of a background on the project, the description of the project. The planned road is approximately 107 kilometers long, like I said, running southeast from Webequie's settlement on the island to the mainland, and then it turns east across the James Bay lowlands to the McFalls Lake area. Now, of that 107 kilometers, 17 of those kilometers sit within the actual reserve boundaries. And the planned corridor, the preliminary corridor with that the project team is working with, is 2 kilometers wide. So the road could sit anywhere within that 2 kilometer wide corridor. Um, so that's where we consider the route alternatives within that 2 kilometer corridor. And then the actual width or right of way of the road, the cleared area for the road would be 35 meters. Next slide, please. Continuing on with describing the project, the planned road would have three major water body crossings: the Winnisk Lake, which would take the road from the island across to the mainland, across Winnisk Lake. Then there would be another crossing southeast of there, Winniskis Channel. And then there would be the final crossing, major crossing at least, of the Mukatai River just west of the end of the road, so just west of the McFalls Lake area. And then, as I sort of touched on before, um, the road is not just a road, it includes other temporary and permanent um, facilities. So these would include aggregate pits or rock quarry areas that would have equipment for processing rock, and then the access roads to get to these places. It would also have construction camps on a temporary basis during construction to accommodate construction crews, and then there would be obviously some operational and maintenance offices associated with the road that would be permanent, and but these support the operations of the road, and there might be other supportive facilities on a temporary or permanent basis. Such as a wastewater treatment plant, like a small wastewater treatment plant, or a potable water or drinking water storage area. As well, there would be storage and laydown yards on a temporary basis for the storage of equipment and materials. Next slide, please. So next we're going to talk a little bit about the alternatives assessment process. So this process, we can move to the next slide, please. This process, it basically in the environmental assessment process for every what you call undertaking, which would be like a project, there has to be considered a reasonable range of alternatives. And these alternatives include what you call alternatives to and alternative methods. So let's go in and talk a little bit about these because it's important to understand this. So the alternatives to the proposed undertaking or project are what you call functionally different ways of approaching or dealing with the problem or opportunity. And I'm going to get into an example of that in a minute. Alternative methods are different ways of carrying out the proposed undertaking or doing the same activity. So let's start with the alternatives to. Next slide, please. And hopefully this will explain things for everyone. So alternatives to, different ways of doing this. So instead of a road, you could have perhaps a railway. Perhaps you could use, and I know it may sound a little crazy, but perhaps you could have an airship, a cargo airship move materials from Webequie to the Ring of Fire area. That's a possibility. Perhaps you could use a hovercraft. Um, so that's another possibility. You could have a railway as well too. So these are different modes of transport, and perhaps if there were, and I don't believe there is, an existing trail system that would go from Webequie to the McFalls Lake area, um, perhaps this could be upgraded to a seasonal winter road, and that might address the community's needs. Again, this is an alternative to scenario. Perhaps the traffic demand could be managed better so that there wouldn't be a need for this. Or the option that's always there is the do nothing option. Just keep things the way they are. So that's what we that's what we're talking about when we talk about alternatives to. So let's move now to talk about alternative methods. Next slide, please. There we go. So when we talk about alternative methods of carrying out the undertaking or the project, these are different ways of doing the same activity. So, okay, if we're doing an all-season road, these could be different routes. What would be the different things if you have an all-season road? It would be the path that the road follows, the route. So you could have, different routes based on different factors. So maybe if you had an engineering factor, the road might be different from what the community exactly wanted. So there's a lot of different factors involved in that, and we'll get into that as with time as well. So let's move now to talk about and introduce some of the upcoming radio show and live stream topics on the next slide, please. So over the next probably 10 or so weeks, on a bi-weekly basis, we will be talking about different topics, the ones I mentioned at the beginning. And just to remind everyone, you can call or text us 1-844-424-0500. That's 1-844-424-0500. Numbers on your screen, and that's how you get more information too at supplyroad.ca. So our first topic, so in 2 weeks from today, we'll be talking about alternatives routing in the preferred corridor. And I just talked a little bit about this. So we have that preferred corridor that's 2 kilometers wide. And we have a community identified preferred route within that corridor for the road. And then From that we have derived a couple of other alternatives based on other factors. So for example, from an engineering perspective, from a constructability perspective, looking at um, soils and terrain. So looking at maybe the best types of soil to build on. Um, Looking at the narrowest crossings to save money in terms of um, uh, building bridges or installing culverts. It could be things like height of land, right? So maybe if we could find higher ground to build the road on, that might make it easier to build on. So if we can go back to that slide, please, the previous one. So that's what I'm talking about here. So you have these different alternatives, road alternatives within the corridor of 2 kilometers based on different things, different factors. Next slide, please. So then we talk about the evaluation of alternative road corridors. So what's involved in looking at the alternative? What things do we think about when we're looking at the alternative road corridors? We would look at things like maybe vegetation, fish and fish habitat, um, use by community members, particularly significant areas that are considered special by community members that we should avoid. Um, we could look at other factors in terms of, like I talked about, constructability of the road in a particular corridor, cost, all kinds of, there's many, many, many issues. Next slide, please. And then another topic that we're going to be covering, and this is not a small one, is a discussion of the proposed criteria and indicators for the evaluation of road corridor alternatives. Now, um, I've got quite a few of them on the screen here right now, and this sort of, I hope, gives you an idea of just the level of detail and study that goes into an environmental assessment. So you look at some of these topics like geology, terrain and soils, surface water, groundwater, air quality, climate change, noise. Some of these things people don't necessarily think about. Vegetation and wetlands, fish and fish habitat, wildlife, archaeological resources, um, built heritage, cultural heritage resources. Now, you know, a lot of that information would be collected as part of the Indigenous knowledge data collection. Socioeconomic environment, Indigenous land and resource use, Aboriginal and treaty rights and interests. Visual environment, something people don't consider. When you all of a sudden you build a road, you're changing the landscape to a degree. So that might be affecting the way that you may enjoy a traditional activity. So that has to be considered in terms of impact. Um, Again, another less obvious one like noises, and then human health, right? We have to, as part of doing the environmental assessment or the impact assessment, determine that or establish that baseline, environmental baseline, human health baseline is only one of those components, but it's important to paint that picture so that people understand um, the way things are right now. That gives us a way to identify potential impacts during construction, after construction, because we have a baseline, we have those existing conditions defined. Next slide, please. So another interesting discussion that we're going to have is the analysis of the alternatives using multiple accounts analysis. This sounds very complicated, and it is to a degree, but hopefully we'll be able to break it down and make it easier to understand. But the best way to describe it is working with different map layers, where each map layer would represent something, for example, that would be important to community members, whether it's vegetation, um, uh, many other factors. These would all be different layers of information that are overlaid, and you can weigh layers and so that they're considered more important perhaps than other layers based on input from community members and the general public. And so by doing this, you create sort of this um, the way to describe it is a surface, right? So you take all these layers, you combine them together, and you're doing a scoring. You're doing a scoring to sort of evaluate areas, very small geographic areas, and identify where sensitivities might be and the degree of sensitivity of the area through which the road might go. And then that way, it allows you to compare one route with another route. It's very detailed. It can get quite complicated, but the important thing to remember is it makes it clear for everyone. It allows everyone to provide their input and opinion as to how important certain factors are, and it gives you a pretty good picture of the 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 least impact, the route of least impact. Um, uh, that goes through the least sensitive areas. So we'll talk a bit about that. It's really interesting stuff. I think it's something that community members need to understand, because it's a way to take all of that information that's collected, combine it together, and really come up with a solid sort of defensible um, reason for a particular route for the road. Next slide, please. And then we move to what you call evaluation of alternatives for supportive infrastructure. So I mentioned supportive infrastructure would be things like aggregate and rock source areas that you need to build the road and that you need to maintain the road. Construction camps and lay down storage areas. Again, you need these on a temporary basis to build the road. Where do you put them? You have to go through an evaluation to identify the best places for these based on, a lot of factors. Where the amount of area that you need, land that you need, and then you want to put them in areas that are less sensitive. And then access roads. I mean, to get access to a gravel pit, you need a road because the trucks need to go to the pits and quarries to get access to the rock. So the idea is that these pits and quarries be as close as possible to the road. It doesn't always work out that way, but that would keep the access roads shorter, and there's less of a footprint of a direct footprint of the project on the land as well. Types of structure. So, what type of water crossing structure? Would it be a bridge? Would it be a culvert? There's different sizes of bridges. There's different types of culverts and sizes of culverts. All those things require evaluation in terms when you're routing things, and then the road engineering design in general. So, lots of factors to consider. And I'll get into that on our next slide a little bit, actually, Nick, because we're talking about one of our topics is proposed criteria and indicators for evaluation of alternatives for supporting infrastructure. So, of course, I talked about the valued components when I was reading off those different many factors that might be considered in evaluating route alternatives for the road, but the same thing goes for supporting infrastructure, except there's slightly different considerations because there's things like, well, you need to find out where the rock is available or the gravel is available, and then you have to come up with estimates as to the potential size of the deposits, because that'll give you an idea of how many facilities, quarries, pits are necessary in order to build the road and then maintain the road as well too. And I talked a bit about this before as well, the length of access roads and the number of water crossings that those access roads make. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about over the next few weeks. And I wanted to mention again, there's we want to keep our door open so that we can hear from you to the greatest degree possible. And you can get us on social media. You can see the contact information here. You can contact us through the Supply Road website. We have regional consultation lead, and then we have a local consultation lead, and then you have myself as a consultation lead. Lots of people to contact if you have questions or comments. We will get back to you and and address your comments and questions. So we really want to keep communication open on this project. We've been trying to do that for since the beginning of the project, trying to explain things, help community members sort of go through the process with us, and so that they can follow along, and then they're informed and they can ask really good questions and find out things that they might be unsure about. And we don't want you to be afraid to ask. We want to encourage you to ask questions. So that wraps up today's overview of the alternatives assessment process, and we hope it was helpful, and we hope it encourages you to join us in 2 weeks. Don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available on our website and the information I just gave you. Miigwech, and we will talk to you again in 2 weeks when we talk about alternatives routing in the preferred corridor. Miigwech, see you soon.